All right, welcome everybody. It's cool to see you all here. Many friends, comrades. Also great to see people who haven't yet met. Welcome to SCI-Arc and welcome to the Views of Planet City exhibition. This is a public event related to that exhibition. And my name is John Cooper. I was involved in the exhibition and faculty here at SCI-Arc. And today's event is with At.Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin and At.JoNina Abron-Ervin. And we welcome you here to SCI-Arc very much. And I'm going to say a few words about the exhibition project overall, about Planet City Spoils in particular, which is a component of this exhibition, and then why we invited Lorenzo and At.JoNina to be with us here today. Views of Planet City is part of Getty PST, and it's a project that's led by SCI-Arc faculty Liam Young, featuring the work of SCI-Arc faculty Jen Chen, Damian Jovanovic, Angelica Lorenzi, and myself. And the project was managed by Namik Makskic and Eric Ganoyu. So first about the concept of Planet City. Liam Young's Planet City concept is a vision of a future city for 10 billion people, into which all of Earth's human population has retreated, surrendering the remainder of the planet to a global-scale wilderness and the return of stolen lands. Based on the biologist E.O. Wilson's half-Earth theory, in which he stipulated that in order for all of Earth's present plant and animal biodiversity to survive, human habitation would have to withdraw from 50% of the planet's surface. Planet City calls for a far more extreme withdrawal to just 0.2% of the planet, a single city less than the size of a small US state. The idea is extreme and forces contemplation of the apparently impossible, and yet we know the impossible is what we need now. One of Planet City's axioms is that nothing new is extracted to feed the new city's construction, which means that the existing built environments of the world's current cities are the resources and the material banks that must be mined, foraged, and stolen to build the future. It's in this act of dismantling, redistribution, and reuse that architecture might find its revolutionary moment, to physically and materially unbuild the systems of unlivability which define the urban condition and rebuild their components along other lines, to each according to their need. The Mobile Architecture Platform Apparatus, aka MAPA, which is behind us here, and which ordinarily lives inside the gallery alongside Angelica's work, is an attempt to translate this speculative future project into architectural direct action by furnishing a bicycle-powered mobile platform that can travel throughout the city and beyond, bearing a model kit of parts of the built environment that have been laser scanned and fabricated at 1:40 scale to form a beginning deconstruction archive with communities in the city, carrying out the work of co-envisioning and prefiguring new worlds out of the dismantled and expropriated property of capitalist accumulation. The fabrication of this apparatus itself modeled the general project of expropriation, dismantling and repurposing of private property, which underwrites this whole project, and restored it to common use through a collaboration with Jimmy Lizama, our friend and comrade, founder of the bicycle activist unit Reciclos, which fabricates cargo bicycles for community need. The metal under chassis, for example, was a stolen fence. The wheels and other suspension and fork components have all been produced out of the unwelded, dismantled, and reconstituted carcasses of abandoned bicycles and scrap metal. Working with urban planner and pioneer of participatory community model-making methods, James Rojas, the MAPA has been deployed and will continue to be deployed around LA, and forthcoming when we ride it to Tijuana to directly embody bottom-up acts of imagining together, how to live outside of top-down authoritarian state or developer-controlled cities through collective model-making workshops and riding our bikes. When people come around this table and begin to build and model together, stories begin to be shared. Stories and memories about what it means to live together well, what shelter means, what living with others means, what it feels like, how it could be done otherwise. The results of these modeling sessions with scale model foraged parts of real buildings are staged here on the tabletop, which continues to be reworked through the course of this exhibition and beyond. But perhaps more than any resulting single physical form, it's the stories that people journey with that make up the cities we really live in, and for which this apparatus can, in a small way, serve as a memory and prefiguration machine. Friendship is the most important technology of the future, and the fabrication and ideation of this apparatus was done in common with Jimmy Lezama and James Rojas, and an incredible and motley crew of students who have become great friends, and I want to thank them all. Chris Dittmer, Maria Kurieva, Brianna Browning, Kai Daniels, Michael Bolt, Gillian Leedy, Kelly Dix-Van, Shuang Chu, Pan Tan, Carl Zong, Omid Durrani, Mo Razak, Milan Sledge, Asad Khan, Jester Suto, Eva Pallas, as well as Nils, Tris, Zeno, William, Jess, Kyla, and Jimmy from Recyclos and the BC Crofamo crew. Working with you all has been Planet City as fuck. So why should we be joined today, to get on to the important part, why should we be joined today by Lorenzo and JoNina? So I'm going to try and explain. JoNina Abron-Ervin is an activist, author, and retired educator. Her work includes leading a campaign to end the naked jailing of black men in Kalamazoo, Michigan. She's a former editor of the Black Panther magazine, the Black Panther newspaper, excuse me, and author of the book Driven by the Movement, Activists of the Black Power Era, a new version of which will be published in 2025. A retired Western Michigan University Associate Professor of Communication, she has published several articles about the Black Panther Party and the Black Power era. At.Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin is an American writer, activist, and black anarchist. He is a former member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, and Concerned Citizens for Justice. Following an attempt to frame him on weapons charges and for threatening the life of a Ku Klux Klan leader, Lorenzo hijacked a plane to Cuba in February 1969. While in Cuba and later Czechoslovakia, Ervin grew disillusioned with the authoritarianism of state socialism. Captured by the CIA in Eastern Europe, he was extradited to the US, put on trial, and sentenced to life in prison in 1970. He was introduced to anarchism whilst in prison, inspiring him to write Anarchism and the Black Revolution in 1979. Released after 15 years, Lorenzo remains politically active. If Planet City is a speculative proposal of what seems like an impossible transformation of life on planet Earth, JoNina and Lorenzo are living examples of actualizing a speculative and apparently impossible future. They have enacted lifelong belief in the impossible, and their decades of work and lived experience has demonstrated that the impossible is indeed possible. Lorenzo and JoNina are theorists and historians, but this work is inseparable from their action. If Planet City is about revolutionary transformation, it can learn from what it has already taken to organize and sustain revolutionary social movements with material consequences from people who began and continue that work. Planet City Spoils is about unbuilding. Any discussion of undoing, the undoing of anything in this country, cannot be thought of without the legacy and leaders of the Black radical tradition, of which JoNina and Lorenzo are so much a part. If we're going to talk about the unbuilding of cities, we should speak with JoNina and Lorenzo, because they have unmade and undone worlds. They've undone law, they've undone prisons, undone oppression, and opened liberatory spaces in their place. So with that, thank you, JoNina and Lorenzo, for coming here from Chattanooga. You're very welcome. Let's extend a warm welcome. It's been a pleasure to be with you the last couple of days and converse and chat. And of course, this is going to be very much open to a collective discussion. So just wanted to pick up where we've been talking about lately. Let's start maybe with the subject of unbuilding. We've spoken a lot about that. Lorenzo, what does unbuilding mean to you? And do we have the mic?
Yes. I was going to say, let me start in since I'm an anarchist and I don't obey commands and stuff. Let me start the way I want to start it. And let's say that, well, this is the second time I've been here. And, well, it was great the first time. I hadn't thought about anything else about it. I said, well, I've got some friends over in LA and so forth, and they're working hard at an institute. They think some of my ideas are great and so forth, and that's that. And lo and behold, I was called for this tour, and I came. And, you know, when I came here, I was totally confused in one sense. What would architects want to talk to me for? And I thought about it, and I've thought about it since. And one of the things is my background is I got a little education. My background is as a urban planner in political science field, and it happened in a real weird way. I got the chance to go to college after I got out of prison. Now, I thought everyone knew I was an anarchist. I mean, not just people I work with. I thought a lot of the officials and everything. The mayor in the city of Chattanooga is an FBI agent, was an FBI agent. So I assumed he knew everything when they put me in his office as an intern. And when they put me in his office as an intern, every day I'd go in and steal papers and stuff from him. And that's how I found out about so many projects that were corrupt, conducted by corrupt officials and by, the real estate companies. And I found out so much about the architectural companies that they always called upon to do the dirty work, to build the prisons, to build the jails, and to build the big buildings downtown for the rich and the corporate lawyers and all this stuff. And these are the same people, however, that put us in the ghetto. Ghetto housing, the projects and all this stuff was done by a team of these esteemed officials, And so there was a fight developed. I was there, I got all these papers and I gave them to people in the streets. They started reading those documents on the radio. And Black people for the first time found out what the city was really doing, what this mayor who always smiled at them but did nothing for them, what he was really all about. And so this went on for several months. I was in there for 6 months. I stole everything I could get my hands on, every file that exposed their liability, that proved they were involved in skullduggery, like these police shootings. At the time when we were doing all this, the city of Chattanooga had the largest number of police killings in the country for a city under 200,000 people. Now that isn't something that I just, made up myself. That was actually in the file from the Department of Justice. And they had been stifling the ability for people to get any justice in these cases. There were a lot of Black people killed there. And there were so many Black people killed there. We had so many people, period, killed in the city jail that we had created a file that we called it the body count of those killed by the police in custody. And So I joined the movement, you know, eventually, covertly, I joined the movement. I gave them all this information. I gave them strategies and everything, you know, to take the fight to another level. And eventually I left City Hall after I'd gotten what I needed and exposed them. I left City Hall and started working with this movement in the streets, this Concerned Citizens for Justice. This was not the Black Panther Party from the 60s. This is a different historical period. And there was, you know, back in the 60s, you didn't have this many killings and so forth because there was a movement like the Black Panther Party, or there was other group movements on the local level that you might not even know of today, but they were instrumental in acting as some form of armed self-defense against the police and against white supremacists who would come in the community and commit terror. So my time in the mayor's office was well used. And when I found out what this system is all about, this whole concept of, you know, urban planning, I rebelled against it. And me being an anarchist, I started writing my thoughts in terms of how to build an alternative to this, a way to combat it, and a way to put power in the hands of the people. And I was always told this when I was in the Black Panther Party, we're putting power in the hands of the people, all power to the people. So this was the direction I decided that we got to find a way to create an alternative people's campaign to control the budget, to deal with you know, police practices, and to deal with the monies and other things that Black people were supposed to receive, the housing sector in the Black community that nobody ever did anything about. And this is why ghetto housing, substandard housing exists in communities, Black communities, and other communities of color, especially in poor communities. This is why it exists, because these politicians pilfer the budget, reward their friends in the sector of, you know, that build housing, real estate developers and others, and we get left in the dark. So we started to work and fight that in Chattanooga with this group. It was a new organization. It came in existence because a Black man had been killed in the city jail. His daughter became radicalized, and she started this radical civil rights group. It's essentially what it was. And I worked in that movement a long time. It was one of the major anti-Klan and anti-police brutality groups in the South for over a 15-year period, you know. And then I left there eventually and moved to Atlanta right before the 1996 Olympics, 94. And in 94 is when we started Black autonomy in Chattanooga, in Atlanta, at one of the Atlanta University complexes. You know, they have several colleges there, and one of them was Clark University, Clark College. I can't ever get that finished straight now. But so I went in, one of the guys I'd met there and to talk to, he said, I'll set it up for you so you can just come right on in this class and just take over for the teacher. The teacher's down with it. She knows what's going on. She wants to get away. That's something. So I came in this class, and sure enough, everybody was sitting there in attention, waiting on me. You know, I was startled in a way, you know, and I started speaking. I said, well, you know, we got to bring an end to these the situation where the government's trying to give away the transit system to the white suburbs, and you know, workers and residents of the city won't be able to afford to ride the transit system anymore. Said we have to fight back. And it was at that time a lot of people were already upset over that. They had a mass meeting and so forth, but these these preachers that are hooked up with the government and all this kind of thing. All they want to do is to get people to let off steam, and then they'll do nothing, no follow-up at all. So we created a group, we call it the Atlanta Transit Riders Union. And anyone who rode the transit system could join, could come to the meetings and so forth. And so we had a mass meeting, and we decided what we were going to do was go to the offices of the transit officials. You know, they had open meetings. So we're going in there, and we're going to take that sucker over. That's what we're going to do. So I had some, some kind of glue or something. The guy gave me, he said, hey, take this glue. You can glue the door shut. The security guards can't get in there. So I glued the door shut. And we went in, and these sisters went in there with it. There was a lot of people went in there, you know, we just locked the guards out. By the time they got up there and knew what was going on, they couldn't get in. This stuff was airplane strength glue. Stuff was tough. And they beat on the door and all this stuff. We were just pushing these people around and grabbing the guy. He was running, and the lady jumped on him and sat on him, kept him on the floor and said, you're going to listen to what we have to say. And we forced them to sign a community benefit agreement that they would not raise the fare, at least for 5 years. They would not give the transit agency over to the suburbanites who weren't paying any money at all. All the money into the system came from, you know, poor people, workers and residents. They paid these fares. And these people weren't paying anything, but they wanted to let them come into the city for the Olympics, and they would give them preferential treatment. So we said, no, that's not going to happen. So we held the building, forced them to sign these agreement, had it publicized, took it to the street, and everybody knew about it. You know, and this guy who was heading the agency had been Dr. King, one of Dr. King's main orators and activists. You know, he actually took over after Dr. King was killed, and his name was Joseph Lowry. And when we got through talking about him in the street, they called him Joseph Lousy, Joseph Lousy, or that lousy Lowry, or whatever, you know. And they humiliated him. We humiliated him, and we put such pressure on the city that that was a victory right off the bat. And we started working also on other cases. You know, a brother was killed there by the city police. The whole city saw it. They showed it nationwide, in fact. The man was shot and killed. He was going to pick up his motorcycle from a shop. And these crazy cops just came up into the door and just started shooting at him and everybody in the building, you know. And they dragged him out and shot him on the sidewalk and killed him. And a lot of people saw that, and they were frightened. But you know, before the rise of Black Lives Matter, where everybody claims to be in favor of fighting back against the police and all that stuff, before those days came along, the majority of people felt like you shouldn't speak up against the police, especially in the South. You shouldn't speak up against the police. That there was something wrong with you if you did that, and so forth and so on. And many times we had people get angry at us for raising the issue instead of just let the police show you what happened. I said, we're not deferring to the police or any authorities, the mayor or anybody else. We don't want to hear it. We did recreations, and we did marches, and we did all kinds of stuff. We even went to the bureau where the coroner had his office, and we made him conduct the proceedings public. That was tough for his mother to watch, but the autopsy was done publicly, and the report was filed immediately, so we don't have to wait 3 weeks or have the mayor promise to give you the results and all this other kind of stuff. It's a political game. So Black autonomy was kind of formed around the ideas of Black radical urbanism. And this is why it has things in common with architecture. And this is why we were able to build a movement, you know, in the real, as they say, you know, the real thing. It wasn't theoretical. We were putting pressure on the authorities. Even though we were a new movement, even though we had limited numbers and all that, we were able to excite the people in the city. We were able to push the business class up against the wall where they had to make concessions that they'd never made before. And we were able, even to the point that new proposals for things like that would change the city and different corporations' plans had to be made public for the first time. They weren't before. You didn't know anything was going on. Even with the price hikes, we didn't know anything right away. We found that out covertly. Somebody working there dropped a dime on them, as they say. And but when I came here, I hadn't thought deeply enough. I was kind of caught off guard, and I wasn't thinking deeply enough that, yeah, I had a hell of a lot in common with architects, and I should be here talking to you about some of this stuff and making it real. I should be, and I came here and I was talking about how architects have a responsibility, a social and political responsibility to not just be stooges for the government, capital that create their institutions, harmful institutions that do great social harms to whole communities, that you should be part of a movement, a struggle in the streets that's going to transform society and do it forever. It's a revolution. It's a revolution of ideas maybe first, but it's a people's revolution that can transform the whole of society. And so when I came, and I thought about this deeply ever since I left, it affected me deeply. And I said, I need to look at my own past and understand why I was standing there saying these things. Because I've experienced it. I've fought for it in more than one city. I created an organization based around it. And, you know, at the time I was doing many of the things I did, even when I was in prison, I was the only black anarchist in the country. At first, I was. I used to go to meetings, I'd be the only one there. Only black person there, only person of color there. And, but I overcame that as well. We created Black Autonomy, which was the first Black Anarchist Federation. Certainly in North America. I'm not saying it's the whole first one in the world, that I don't know, but it certainly is the first one in North America. And the book that I wrote, and I wrote that book, Anarchism and the Black Revolution, from the standpoint of the anarchist movement and radical social change movements must realize that what we're seeing in the 1960s is a black revolution. And this revolution was changing the country. It was also making allies of many radicals and activists and people who became radicals. They had become radicals because they saw what the Black Panther Party was doing and the extent it was going to prevent a fascist state. The interesting thing here is that I look back at this situation and you realize that the Black Panther Party had a conference, and you said 1969, in Berkeley against fascism. And it was an open invitation. And well, between 5,000 and 6,000 people came. And it was from every kind of organization, to be quite honest, even organizations that you don't consider to be a militant organization. They came and they realized that the state of the country was a state. You know, the Black Panther Party could be destroyed. They were trying to destroy it. And they were looking for allies, and they were looking for allies, and they weren't just looking for black allies. They were looking for anybody that would stand up against fascism and racism, and who wanted to change this country, wanted to see a socialist, even of course, for me, I always believed in stateless socialism, but anyway, they wanted a socialist country, and they were willing to fight for it, and some died for it, were willing to do it. And for me, I went to prison for the rest of my life. That's what I thought. It was a possibility. It was a possibility I could be in prison for the rest of my life. I was given 2 life sentences without possibility of parole. And you can get killed real easy in prison. Prison is death. Prison is violence. That's what it is. It's the lack of hope. But I went to prison at a time when there was plenty of hope, because they were building a mass prison movement based on the civil rights model. They had seen for years all these Black Power activists and activists in the anti-war movement. They'd seen this for years, and they said, well, who's speaking for us? Who's going to speak for us? And so they built a movement. I was one of those that helped build this movement that was one of the most important movements during the 1970s and afterwards, but certainly during the 1970s when its heyday. And it was the assassination of George Jackson in 1971, August of 1971, and the murders, mass murders and tortures on television of the Attica prisoners pushed us forward, pushed the prisoners as a class forward. And in the process, we got hundreds of thousands of supporters, maybe more, but there was a lot of people that saw it on television, and they became politically educated and horrified to know what really happens in prisons in their name. And so this is the kind of thing that made me the activist who I am. Even when I was a so-called urban planner, or they thought I would be an urban planner, traditional urban planner, I was planning a different world. It's like John was saying, we have to plan for the contingency that we may not be in the country like this. We might be in a country where half the planet has to be given over to other species or given over to plant lives. I mean, that's not really science fiction. With the kinds of things, nuclear weapons on this planet, with the kind of crazy misleadership and in the hands of the wrong kind of people, and the just oppressive environment in this period. With that being the case, it is eminently possible that things like this that we could take for granted, projects like this, say, well, it's such a small scale, I can't possibly see it. A lot of people may say that. But the things I experienced in my own life, I can make myself see the possibility of a great many things, and you should too. You should keep an open mind, keep commitment to social change, and you should try to make this so-called profession, as they want to call it, they've corrupted it, they've corrupted it, but it's like everything else. Your job is to transform it and use it for the good of humanity and for the people. That's your job, and that's what I talked about the last time, and I guess I'll forever be talking about that. I'll give you my little bit of background to let you know that I had a way to get to the same place that you are now. I went through the same kind of system and managed to overthrow it, and also managed to, as best I could, with the limited resources we had, put the people in power, at least put the people in a contending position so they'd be able to ask questions and know what was going on, which was not the case before. The only people that got down to City Hall and talked about anything were the real estate developers. They ran City Hall. Nobody else can even get in there and say a word edgewise. So I'll give you this little tidbit just to get you to understand the background I came from. Now, the issue of unbuilding. Is it possible? How to do it? Okay. It can only happen in a set of circumstances where there's a crisis that weakens those in power, and in my opinion. And in such a situation, grassroots movements can pressure those in power. They can overthrow those in power. So we could be talking about doing a revolution or doing any massive protests. And in case you don't know, the 1960s was a revolution. That's what it was. It was defeated, but it was a revolutionary period. So we're talking about now, this day, we are looking at the possibility, not only the possibility, the reality of fascists taking over the government. And I have not heard anybody saying anything. And they could destroy everything, including many of the people in it. And they could make this place a living hell. Or we can step up together and make this a new world, a new society. We can do that. The choice is there. Crisis. When there's a crisis situation is the time when you best can succeed. Because if you think about it, things are possible in times where there is great peril or the threat of great peril. People may be willing and should be willing to fight for their families, for their children, their loved ones, their community. Every social attachment we have, we should be willing to fight those in power who do not have our interests. And in fact, are trying to crush us, plotting to crush us. That's not to say that they can. The only way that fascists can defeat, even if they're in power, the only way that fascists can actually defeat you is if you do nothing. And if you do nothing, then that means you're collaborating. It's just so simple that there's no in between. But we can change the world, and we can do it bit by bit. We can do it working every day. We can do it with projects in the community. We can do it with connecting with people that we don't necessarily, ordinarily connect with, who are in different social groups, different racial groups, different whatever. And we will have to find a basis of unity. You understand what I'm saying? I haven't had a chance to say anything about this, nothing, to be quite honest. And I thought about it a long time. We've got to take what we have right now. The skills you have are so powerful, are so wonderful, in fact, that you can transform the world. It's not a hackneyed phrase or political speech. I'm sorry. But where you are right now, you have the ability to transform the world. And, there's so much cynicism in this society. And, cynicism is a political defense, actually. It's a way that people justify power being over them and them not contested. We can no longer afford cynicism. We have to afford ourselves hope. We have to fight for freedom every day, every way. And in doing that, this is why you make your studies a real tool of liberation. We want to liberate the land. That's what this is all about. We want to liberate the land and liberate the people. And they want to oppress the people and destroy the land. So those are the odds. Those are the issues. All right, John, I don't know what else I'm supposed to say up here. I thought I said a lot the last time, but I'm so thankful to be here. I'm so thankful to be in your presence. And I believe that if we work together, if we invent and reinvent ideas, because some things are in the past we've forgotten that we can use along with the new things. We can use technology for liberation, just like what we call, back in the day, calling the man. The man would use technology for oppression. So just think about that. Just think about that. Projects for liberation, projects for freedom, projects for survival is what we're talking about today. And it's just my way of saying it, but you know, that's what it is. You ready? Yeah. Okay, here's my co-worker.
Well, you know, I'm someone who never thought I'd be speaking to at a school of architecture. I thought, me? That's not my background. I don't know anything about architecture, and how does that relate to me? But you know, as I began to do some research and some discussion with Lorenzo, I realized that, you know, that's not true. We talk about rebuilding the city, you know, from the bottom up. In order to do that, we first have got to understand how we got to the present situation, the crisis that we're in right now. This did not happen just the last, 10 years. You know, many of you here are young people. This started happening before you were born. In other people's lifetime. You know, and it started back when Lorenzo and I were young people. And you cannot deal with the rebuilding unless you know how you got here and what happened. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that because I think that it really helped me when I knew some things, but I didn't know everything. And in the process of getting ready to be here today, I learned some information that I, on the one hand, really did not come as any surprise to me, but nevertheless, it's information that if people had back in the day, things might have been different. You know, we have a situation now where millions of low income, poor, working class, Black, other people of color, just poor people in general, of any color, any nationality, are being forced out of the cities. This is a process that's been going on for a long time. And it started in the late 1960s. We used to call it, when I was a kid coming up, you know, in the late 50s and the 1960s, we would hear my parents and the other adults talk about urban renewal, because they were going into mostly Black neighborhoods and destroying those neighborhoods. So we said, this is urban renewal. But there's a reason why all this came about. In the late 1960s, there were a number, and some of you may have studied this previously, there were a number of urban rebellions in some of the major cities in the United States. Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles. And in fact, one of those major urban rebellions took place right here in LA in August 1965. It happened in what was then called the Watts community, the Black section of Los Angeles, the Watts Rebellion of 1965 here in Los Angeles. And many of these rebellions got started because there were incidents of police terror against Black people. And that's how the one here got started. A young Black man was arrested by the police, and his mother came to his defense trying to prevent his arrest. And the situation escalated and escalated, and it became a full-fledged, you know, we call it rebellion. The government officials and police called it a riot, and it's also been called civil disorder. But you know, I prefer to look at it as a rebellion, because what happened was people wound up not only rebelling against the police terror that was going on in their community, they were also rebelling against all the conditions, substandard conditions that were in the Watts community and the other sections, other cities in the United States in 1960, 1967, you had a rebellion in Detroit, also started by an incident of police terror. And then about a month or two later, you had another one in Newark, New Jersey. So there were all these rebellions that took place, mostly beginning in 1964, going through to the late 60s. So what happened was the government said, we got to figure this out, because their opinion was we can't have Black people tearing up our cities like this. I mean, that's what their attitude was. So Lyndon Johnson, who was president back then, president of the United States, he formed a commission it became known as the, oh, it's not Hine, okay. A commission that became known as the Kerner Commission. And it was called the Kerner Commission because it was named after, at the time, the governor of Illinois, his name was Otto Kerner, and Lyndon Johnson put Kerner in charge of this commission. And their job was to do a thorough study of what led to all these Black rebellions during the 1960s. What's going on here? We've got to find out what is going on here so we can take action, so we can take steps, so it'll never happen anymore. We want to stop this. So the Kerner Commission did its work over a number of years, and they came up with certain platitudes. We must destroy the racial inequities in America. There are two separate Americas, one for Black and one for white. And of course, since then, obviously, you can't simplify it like that anymore, because now we have a wide diversity of ethnicities living in the United States, not just a question of Black and white. We have many, many different peoples from many parts of the world. But at any rate, they had a lot of platitudes about what they needed to do. But that was what they sort of said publicly in their report that was released to people after this study. But behind the scenes, the government said, we have got to do something, but we can't necessarily talk to the public about what we want to do. And they came up with this idea of, they decided that they were going to have to remove Black, particularly Black and people of color, from the central cities. And we've got to get them out of these cities because they're causing the problem. We've got to get them out. And they came up with this term called spatial deconcentration. And this was in the late 1960s. And this is what, my parents and other adults, when I was growing up as a kid, we called it urban renewal. But the government's name for it was spatial deconcentration, to depopulate major cities in the United States of their Black, people of color, poor people, get them out of the cities, deconcentration. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in a minute about that. Most people didn't know about this. They didn't know anything about spatial deconcentration. About 10 years or so after the Kerner Commission report came out, a housing activist and some other housing activists were supposed to have broken into an office of the Housing and Urban Development Agency, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C. And they did the kind of thing that Lorenzo was doing in Chattanooga. They were accused at least of stealing documents from that office. Now keep in mind, this is 10 years after the urban rebellions. But this is what they did, and this is how we found out about spatial deconcentration. These documents that they were able to liberate from the U.S. Department of Urban Housing talked about how they were going to do the spatial deconcentration. Now, this was serious, and the fact that they had liberated these documents, the government could not let that go unanswered. One of the people who was involved in this was a woman by the name of Yolanda Ward, and she was a housing activist, and she was working with other housing activists. They were going to have a national conference in DC back at that time. This would have been around the summer of 1979, and they had liberated these documents and started reading them. And this is how they found out about spatial deconcentration. Well, the feds, the federal government, got wind of this, that they had allegedly stolen these documents. Some people say it was alleged, who knows? But however it happened, we're fortunate that they did liberate the documents so that we know really what's been going on. And they did not want these housing activists, they did not want Yolanda Ward and her colleagues who were other housing activists to be talking about this and discussing all this at their conference. In fact, she had written a book about it. I'm going to share parts of it. So to cut to the chase, to make a long story short, ultimately, Miss Ward and two of her friends were somewhere in Washington, D.C. on the streets, and they were accosted by two white men who were actually FBI agents. And they were hassled and brutalized. Yolanda Ward, she was thrown to the ground, made to turn over, handcuffed, and then one of the FBI agents proceeded to shoot her in the back of the head. She was assassinated. This is how serious the government took the fact that this whole plan about spatial deconcentration might be revealed to the public. And I knew about the Kerner Commission Report, but this is something that's brand new knowledge for me. And in a way, I knew many activists, Black Power activists that I worked with back in the day were assassinated. But I had never thought that someone who was working to bring about better housing could actually be literally shot to death in the back of the head in Washington, D.C. So, this is something that, but people didn't really know. They didn't know how to put this into context because nobody really knew about spatial deconcentration then. But at any rate, this happened. So I'm going to read to you a portion, because there's no way to paraphrase it, a portion of the book, that report that Yolanda Ward wrote before she was assassinated. And it's simply called Spatial Deconcentration. And I talked about the Kerner Commission before because she references the Kerner Commission report. So I wanted people to know what she was talking about. So I'm going to read from this, and this is a quote from her book. The Kerner Commission strategists came to the conclusion that America's inner city poverty was so entrenched that the ghettos could not be transformed into viable neighborhoods to the satisfaction of its residents or the government. The problem of riots, therefore, could be expected to emerge in the future, which they didn't want, perhaps with more intensity and as a more serious threat to the constitutional privileges which most Americans enjoy. So they finally concluded, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they finally concluded that if the problem could not be eliminated because of the nature of the American system of free enterprise, then technology could contain it. This could only be done, though, through a theory of spatial deconcentration of racially impacted neighborhoods. In other words, poverty had been allowed to become so concentrated in the inner cities that hopelessness overwhelmed their residents and the government's resolve to dilute it. This hopelessness had the social effect of a fire near a powder keg. But if the ghettos were thinned out, the chances of a cataclysmic explosion that could destroy the American way of life could be equally diminished. Inner city residents then would have to be dispersed throughout the metropolitan regions to guarantee the privileges of the middle class. Where those inner city residents should be placed after their dispersal had been the subject of intense research by the government and the major financial interests of the United States since 1968. In the Kerner Commission Report, Chapter 17 addressed itself to this prospect, and therefore they came up with the answer of suburbs, which is the farthest place that they could go from the inner city. So spatial deconcentration was in fact this is the, stop ending my quote there. Her book, her pamphlet goes on forever and ever. I can't read you the whole thing. But this was the government's, conclusion as to how they were going to deal with the problem. And spatial deconcentration was in fact a political decision made by the politicians, made by the government to move poor people, black people, low income, white people, and other people out of the city. That was a political decision. Now, on the other end of it today, of course, we're seeing gentrification, which, is sort of, it's evolved. So now we have gentrification, which is more, as Lorenzo was reminding me of, that is a financial decision by the big property developments to push poor people out. So the big real estate developers can build all this expensive housing and charge a lot of money. Meanwhile, poor people are being forced out, evicted because they can't afford to move in these buildings. So we have the spatial deconcentration and we have the gentrification. And, so this kind of national housing crisis that we're having right now, it's a process that began back in the 1960s. A political, direct political decision that was made by the government of the United States to force and push poor people out. And you can read about this. You can Google it. I understand there's a YouTube program on it, just spatial deconcentration. You can learn all about it. It's quite something, and for those, you all are architects, studying to be architects, so this will probably have maybe even a different meaning or more profound meaning for you than it does for me, because I'm not an architect, but I just think of it in terms of poor people being forced out as part of a government design to get them out of the cities so they won't have any more urban rebellions, And these rebellions, scared the government, I remember when the rebellion happened here in Los Angeles in 1965. I was I had just, I guess, probably turned, just turned 17 years old that summer of 65. And it was amazing to me as a youth, to see all these angry black people in the streets here in Los Angeles. I didn't know, I had kind of grown up more seeing the civil rights movement and the peaceful protests and marches, but I had no idea there was this anger among black people in the urban cities. I grew up in a small town, Jefferson City, Missouri, population 30,000. So, it was really small, far removed from an urban area like Los Angeles. So it was really an education for me to see. I said, what are these people so angry about? And of course, I began to learn. That was the beginning of my education about what was really going on in this country, which ultimately led me to be part of the Black Power movement and to join the Black Panther Party as a way to try to deal with this. So these rebellions scared the government to death. They did not want this happening anymore. Spatial deconcentration was their solution. And just to go back to this one point, just as I sum up, you're talking about crisis, the relationship between crisis and revolution. And the urban rebellions brought about a crisis for the federal government. In fact, there was a revolution going on in Black America at that time. That's what caused all this stuff to happen. But it caused a crisis for the federal government. And their solution was to strip the inner cities of the Black population. So I'm going to stop there. People may have questions or move on.
Thank you, JoNina. Thank you, Lorenzo. Maybe I'll just have one further prompt, and then it'd be fantastic to open it to questions. Lorenzo, you spoke about the application of Black Panther principles of organizing to urban planning, and like the eradication of a managerial bureaucratic class structure and the emergence of a bottom-up urban architectural system that puts power into the people. And JoNina, you were talking also about this revolutionary transformation of the structure of society. So, and I know in your writings, you've also written about practical steps for a post-revolutionary anarchic future where the systems of unlivability have been deconstructed and new cities, new ways of living together. I'm thinking of things like insurrectionary squatting, building brigades to rebuild the inner cities, terms that have come up in your writing. And so I just wonder if you'd say a bit about how you formulated the idea of a post-revolutionary city.
Well, a lot of the thinking that I had and still do have today about, how to deal with the current horrible situation that we're dealing with today or at that moment. A lot of the thinking about transforming that had to be based on political theories. That's what made me an anarchist, actually. That the idea of dual power, of community control, they came out the Black Panther Party, but we put that with anarchist politics, rethinking things. We talked about how to fight and how to understand that the struggle, for instance, you heard people talk about reparations, and usually there's some black capitalists talking about it or some academic, but we thought about it in terms of it being expropriation. Instead of begging the government for the study and resources and so forth that reparations would supposedly bring, that in point of fact, we need to build a movement to pressure the authorities that they're not giving us anything, we're taking it. We're building a movement strong enough in the communities, in college campuses everywhere. That's what it was like in the 60s. It was protests everywhere. Some people would say, oh, it was just a small group of hotheads or radical. No, it was a mass movement, and it was touching people everywhere. And so here's an idea that the government, once we expose the government, then if we weaken the government, we're able to push the government into a situation where they had to make concessions. If the government just gives you something, it's a bribe. It's a bribe, or it's a way to keep you under control. But if you take it from them, if you force them to give it to you, then you humiliate the state. This is essentially what the Black Panther Party did with simple programs like free breakfast for children. Because people started saying, well, if this group here can come along and feed our kids, why can't the government do it? They got a hell of a lot more of our money, our tax money. And so it's a contest of, forces. So, that's what it is in every step of the way. I think that in this period, what you got as a problem is that people think that they can get grant money from corporations and grant money from the government and still be in a position to exert pressure. You can't do it. It doesn't work that way. That's a social bribe. That's what that is. That's a social bribe. I've always said it. And, people have started to understand that. When in 1986, when the federal tax code was amended, when it was amended to allow corporations to give money to so-called social justice organizations, what that was really intended to do was to kill off the dregs of the left, I'm not going to say left, the dregs of the movement of the 1960s, the autonomous base of the movement in the 1960s. They created these organizations and this grant money to kill them off. Because if you're fighting a corporation, and you wouldn't be fighting them, but if you're fighting a corporation and you're being given money by that corporation, then they'll stop giving it to you, or threaten to stop giving it to you, and you won't be fighting them anymore. But what they used these groups for was, and I don't want to go off on any tangent or trip about it, I'm just going to tell you like it is, and people used to think at first that COINTELPRO was untrue, till they found out. They found out that the FBI was actually conducting a far-fledged campaign against not only the black movement, but the entire protest movement, left-wing protest movement in the country. But they were doing this for pacification, and they got organizations that they were well-funded, and they used those groups to destroy autonomous groups or native groups in their communities, because they'd be coming in with all this corporate money, and they could give people more. They could give people more to keep them under control. And then when they had them under control and they destroyed the other organizations, then they might cut it off. They might just cut it off completely. And people would have to beg for food and beg, whatever it is that social program they were giving. And back in the day, the Black Panther Party just gave away food every week, or sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. We just give people food. Now, I will say, and Sister JoNina talks about this all the time, they had to hear political speeches telling them why they were poor and why they were hungry, while the rich were getting government contracts and so forth and so on, and living in luxury. They had to hear those things, which they probably need to hear anyway, to be quite honest.
Before you got the food, you had to listen to the speeches, the political education. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I learned, when I became an anarchist, I read heavily, and I read about the Spanish Revolution. Never had heard of the Spanish Revolution before I went to prison and became an anarchist. And Martin Sostre told me about it. And Martin Sostre was my mentor. He was a black Puerto Rican anarchist that was in prison during the late 1960s. He got out of prison on a 41-year frame up in 1974, just to bring you up. But I learned from him, a lot of the things that I learned from him and from other anarchists that were all over the world at that time. The ones in America weren't hardly speaking to me. I don't know what the hell was up with that. That's a whole different story. But they told me about the revolution that took place in Russia. I still got that book today, The Unknown Revolution by Volin. But they told me about something that I had never heard of happening. And they told me about communes, and I read about, started reading Bakunin and reading other anarchists, reading their theories and reading their ideas. And the ideas were applicable to real life. It wasn't just something that was an academic paper that nobody takes seriously to implement as a program, as a social program. But if people were starving in the South, where people were starving greatly during the 50s and 60s, and the student movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, created a co-op, a cooperative movement at that time. It existed a long, long time. I don't know if it still exists today, but it existed at least through the 80s. And the people in Mississippi, farmers, which were really just peasants, if they were in another country, they'd be called them peasants. But they were extremely poor. They were exploited by landowners, exploited later on by these agribusinesses. And they needed a way of surviving this situation. They needed a way of keeping their land, and they needed a way of forcing the government to give them the same money they were giving to white farmers to drive them out of business. And so the students created this movement. This union is effectively a cooperative union, and they got food for people. If people didn't have food, it was just an early survival program. I mean, it wasn't about, a lot of the survival programs existed before the Black Panther Party came along. And, you know, and these people were in the South, and to them, if they didn't have these people coming in from other places, other cities, other states, young people who, most of them were fearless. I mean, you know, the Klan was a terrorist organization, and you could be killed, and some were killed. So, I mean, it's a serious threat. People were told that before they went. They were told that you could be the one to get killed. I mean, we're not all going to get killed, but you could be the one. These people are dangerous. They're treacherous. And so they had this campaign of just starving these people. They couldn't go in the store and buy food from the rich white owners. They couldn't buy food from anybody. So this cooperative, which was created, this food cooperative, and clothing and housing and everything else, cooperative saved many of these people from being starved to death. So they would have to give in and go back to slavery work on the farm, on the rich man's farm. So that's part of where I got ideas from. I got ideas from living struggles, things that actually happened. A similar struggle took place in Tennessee, a small town in Tennessee, where the white racists were angry that the civil rights activists had come there and started protesting. And he cut off everybody, all black people couldn't get any food. Threw them out of their houses, and they were on the side, you know, of the highway, trying to survive. And there again, this cooperative union, this people's movement that involved all these families were able to get money. If they didn't have any money, they could raise the money nationwide to help them get food, to help them get grains, to help them stay in their houses, help them put pressure on the white governments, the state governments as well as the local governments, so that they couldn't do all this with unconstitutional stuff, what people said was unconstitutional, inhuman stuff to people, you know, and couldn't break the back of the movement. So it was extremely important to be able to have a united front, you know. And so people were sending money from everywhere. I'd never seen that. When I was a young man, I was taught to be afraid of the Klan. You know, that you couldn't fight the Klan because the Klan could be a law enforcement officer. He could be a rich landowner or whatever. And we were taught to fear the Klan. And our generation came along in the 1960s, and we were not afraid of the Ku Klux Klan. We formed defense organizations against the Ku Klux Klan. The Deacons for Defense and Justice was in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. The Black Armed Guards were in North Carolina during the late 50s. And there were other armed defense groups as well as individuals practicing armed self-defense, which was an American right, they said. They claim you're a citizen and you have the right to defend yourself. And the landowners didn't like that. They wanted to destroy it, so they had their own version of a boycott, a white racist boycott. But we were able to raise money from people all over the world, actually, and from people that they themselves didn't have a hell of a lot, but they were willing to give the little bit they had to keep these people fighting, to keep these people realizing the ability for freedom, if it was only limited freedom at that time. But freedom doesn't come free. It ain't free. You sometimes have to give your life. Sometimes you are tortured. You suffer other ways. And we learned that. And even a lot of these youth were from privileged homes, these black youths from privileged homes. They were college students at a time when most of the black people in America couldn't go to college, you know. They couldn't go to college. And so what we learned and what I learned from being part of struggles, not necessarily lead, I've never led anything, but being part of the struggles, being in a position to observe some things happening that I couldn't become part of at that time, or what have you, looking at things, studying, and being able to put together a plan in opposition to power that didn't require a lot of money, it didn't require a lot of troops, you know, that only required people on the other end caring enough that they would give whatever they had to those who were suffering. And this was the reality of the situation. You know, we in this country have a tendency to romanticize things, the wrong things sometimes. Some politician or somebody who may at one time in their life did something that was positive, and now he's got his hand out and you know, wants you to elect him or wants you to give him money to run a business or whatever. And this class division is still here. You've got worse housing situations in this country now than you had in the 1960s. And that's something to be said, and a lot of people didn't believe me. But there wasn't mass homelessness in the 1960s to the degree that there is today. And of course, today, homelessness has been replaced by shanty towns and so forth around the country. You know, people are sleeping in the street in large numbers. And this can only be because in this country there is an unjust economic and political system where the billionaires, the rich, enjoy all the economic benefits of the country, and other people barely can survive. And this is class warfare. A lot of people think it's just some industrial workers in a plant and this, that, and the other, and they go on strike and romanticize that. No, this is the really the everyday thing, the entrenched poverty. And this is the thing that has to be fought. So building the type of alternative institutions and becoming ungovernable in this period when the rich have taken over the government along with their fascist cronies, being ungovernable is the only way to stay alive, and it's the only way to enact social change. Being ungovernable means that you will not recognize the government at minimum. You will engage in protest no matter what they say or what they do, or threats or whatever. You will still continue to fight. You may have to change the methods of fighting, but you continue to resist. And not let them have a moment's peace. Sabotage. Somebody was talking about it the other day, the federal workers who are being fired by Trump. It's just a plan. And they said, well, they're looking for the jobs and they're running and they're just not. I said, well, shit. So they should be fighting. They should sabotage that damn shit. Sabotage that place before these fascists even get to it. They know how to do it. Quite frankly, I mean, I'm not saying something to get everyone here in trouble and have an investigation and all that, but that's just the real deal. That's just the real deal. They should be fighting back. And we should all be fighting back in whatever way we can. I'm not saying we all do the same things, but we have to do something to make it impossible for those in power to run the system in a fashion where they want to strip everyone of their rights. They want to put people, well, right now, let's say, this country has the biggest number of people in the world in prison. And they're talking about they want to take 10 million people who are immigrants and march them out of the country. And they want to put them in a concentration camp first, though. And the concentration camp would make profits for this prison company, prison profit company, this kind of thing. So all these things are happening right now before us. These are real things. These aren't from some fiction, somebody wrote a script or something. This is real, and it's something that your life is going to change, and not for the better, so we need to find ways based on the circumstances, the conditions at the time, because at the time, people were able to, as I said, with the union, the cooperative union, it wasn't the only project. There were other things, people found ways to push the Klan out of the community. One little town in North Carolina in late 50s. What? Huh?
I'm your timekeeper.
Oh, I'm sorry. She's my timekeeper. All right. I'm so happy to be here. I'm trying to let people know. Anyway, yeah. If I asked a question, great. If I didn't.
And many others. Would anyone like to contribute a question, reflection? We've got a mic.
Yeah, so I guess I'm leaning on, it's roughly like a 3,000-year-old definition of architects, which is world editor. And so I'm hearing something in what you guys are talking about that is architects have the unique capacity to radicalize communities, peoples, and the systems of power that govern, dictate, and organize the environments we inhabit, right? Because we are the ones hired to mediate these projects from conception to construction. But there's, I think, something that I think is maybe lacking in the current architectural pedagogy that was present in the 1960s and civil rights movements, and that's cultivating a warrior mindset. And that's kind of like, I think, training individuals to persist against all odds, because there's, right, when we radicalize, when we anarchize, or we just choose to challenge the systems of oppression that are very subversive, very subliminal. There's not really a way to predict the ways in which the systems around us will react to it and respond. So I think it's necessary to kind of cultivate this ability to persist against those odds, to react, right? And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how might that kind of mindset and that durability be introduced into something like architectural pedagogy.
Who's that directed to?
Just in general.
Oh, in general.
Well, I don't know much about the pedagogy, as you say, of architecture, but it seems to me that it would start from, if you have this standpoint, you come at it from a point that you're not going to rebuild the structures cities, wherever they are, you're not going to do that the way it used to be. When you start from scratch in the rebuilding, in the planning, you immediately think about a different way of doing it. That is, I think somebody was talking about, maybe you, or about the whole thing about liberating space. You know, we have this, somebody came up with that phrase, I'm sure, but everywhere you go is always being something built. If you see an empty space, you go back 2 weeks later, something's going up, you know, and some building is going up. But as architects, you may figure out a way in the process of rebuilding, liberating the space, doing it in a way that's not, you know, the way it is now. It's how buildings are built and people are separated. I mean, I don't know the terminology because I'm not an architect, but yeah, liberating space, you know, that's my opinion.
And don't forget building, unbuilding oppressive or unsafe spaces, places. That has to be part of it. Now, I don't think that anybody other than someone who is an architect or someone who's in the field of building and unbuilding can make that change, you know. But it has to be with to me, it's always going to be with the community being involved, create new structures and new ways of engagement so that the community that's suffering is part of the process. What we have now is professionals speaking around the people, and the people are a subject, and they decide whether they're going to destroy their community and put up high rises or whatever they decide to do. And that's really the program of gentrification. Well, we have to organize an alternative, you know, and that alternative, I don't expect, and I'm not saying that individuals alone can do this. You have, even everyone here, you would have to link up with other groups and other people who are suffering from these people coming through their communities and pushing people out, changing the culture of the community and so forth, you know. So we got it in our face right now. It's not a theoretical thing, well, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. It's something that has to be decided on now. It's something that has to be organized now. You know, that was one of the things I did learn in the 60s, that the immediacy of the struggle required you to make a decision right now, today. What the hell are you going to do? Don't worry about somebody else. You know, don't look to expect that persons who, you know, got money or people who got you know, education or whatever, those people are not going to do it, to be quite honest. There's very few of those people that might drop out and become part of the radical class. I mean, you know, he's a school teacher who was in the Black Panther Party, you know. So, I mean, it's possible that some people who are in a position, a privileged position, can turn around and join with revolutionary forces and poor people on the bottom. And that has to happen, you know, for us to really make the earth-shaking changes that we're talking about. We are not interested in incremental changes. That's not going to help anybody at this stage. We have to make earth-shaking changes. We have to be willing to push aside power. You know, that sounds crazy. Well, they got guns, they can do this, they can do that. Well, they've always had guns, and they couldn't do it back in the day. I mean, even though they used violence, they used subversion, they could not stop people who were willing to fight and who were united. United, the people cannot be stopped. And so that's really the answer is, first of all, and I had to learn this, and you know, I went through life like everybody else, and looked around and wondered who else was there was going to do it. You know, somebody else should do it. Oh, there was nobody there. Nobody was there. And I knew what I had to do. And I started talking to people who thought like I did. And eventually, we were able to push back some of the worst abuses of the system. I'm not saying we've changed everything, but I'll tell you what, it is a different world in this period from what existed back then. And I'm not saying it's perfect. It certainly is not. We didn't complete the revolution, to say it one way. But another way is that we won important reforms, but we didn't win the complete and total destruction of capitalism, which is what we have to do. We have to be destroying the system that holds all this together. And some people didn't understand that back in the day. They thought it was a question of just doing something, individual acts of bravery and so forth. And they didn't understand that you had to work with people in communities. You know, you wanted to take the people in communities who were not active and make them into activists too, you know. And I really do believe that we can win. See, that's the thing. Even with all the fascists in office and all the craziness and Trump is going to be the king and all this kind of foolishness, no army can stop an idea whose time has come. And I'm firmly convinced that anarchism and the power of people, for the thirst for freedom, won't be stopped. I'm not going to say there won't be hard days. I had lived a life full of hard days. I went to prison on 2 life sentences, and I'm not even supposed to be here, to be honest with you. It should be that I'm just now getting out of prison after 45 years have gone by, and that's what I faced. Prison without possibility of parole. You do 45 years straight without any possibility of any legal intervention. And yet I was able to get out. And I'm not the only one, others were as well, but we had massive support, people who could not be told lies as to what happened, or why I couldn't be released and so forth. So I've learned some things. And one thing I have learned is if you believe you can do it, and if you can convince others, you can change conditions of oppression, even in a dictatorship. And it's always been a dictatorship, if you be truthful. The smiling fool doesn't change anything. But we can't lose hope. That's the thing. We can't give up. Because that's the one way they can beat you, is we give up. Oh, it's too hard. We can't do this. We can't do that. And I've seen the power of a mass movement. And, you know, and when people, they're so committed that if they have to leave this earth at this time, at that time, they're what they're faced with, they're willing to do that. And I'm not asking you to go get out and do anything crazy that you haven't, you know, worked out or isn't a part of a movement. I'm just saying that the possibility is there.
You know, the Fred Hampton, who was the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, Illinois, back in the day, he was I guess a few days ago was the anniversary of his assassination. He was assassinated by a plot between the FBI and the Chicago Police Department on December 4th, 1969. And one of the things that he said once in a speech, he knew that he was someone that was being targeted by the government, and you know, not long before he was killed, he told people, his comrades, that, you know, they're going to try to kill me, you know, and they did. But he once said in a speech that, you know, you can kill a revolutionary, but you cannot kill the revolution. That's what we all have to remember. Yes, you know, we're all mortal people, and we'll die of natural causes or we'll be killed. But if you got a struggle that's going on that's powerful enough, that cannot be killed. That cannot be killed.
Yes. I know there's a lot more to talk about and to share. I'm going to propose that we continue over something to eat. So I want to thank you, Lorenzo and JoNina, for sharing everything that you shared with us today. Let's continue over something to eat. Thank you.